Alright, so today we're going to learn about Fragile X syndrome. It has to do with the brain and the X chromosome, and a part of the X chromosome that is called the FMR1 gene, and it makes a protein in our brain called the FMRP protein. I'll explain further about that once we get into the slides. So the definition of Fragile X syndrome, or FXS, is it's a genetic condition that causes intellectual disability, behavioral and learning challenges, and various physical characteristics. It's one of the most common inherited disorders because it's passed on through the X chromosome, as you guys know, through our genetics. So characteristics of people with FXS. Females will have 5% of the females will have recurring seizures. This is just for females. Males will have 15% recurring seizures. With males, you tend to see a long, narrow face. You see large ears, prominent jaws, and a forehead, unusually flexible fingers, and enlarged testicles after puberty. A lot of these same things you can actually see with people who have Down syndrome, and people would kind of get those two mixed up a lot. And really the only way to tell the difference is to get a genetic test and get the results for that test. So, characteristics for both genders. They'll have flat feet, very flexible joints, low muscle tone, large body size, large forehead, softer skin, a lot of behavioral problems. They'll have anxiety disorder, hyperactive behavior, attention deficit disorder, delayed walking or crawling, hand clapping, biting, speech and language delay, mental retardation, and that's more likely with the more repeats that you have in the gene. There's a trinucleotide repeat called CGG, and if the more repeats that there are, the more likely and the more severe each of these physical behavioral characteristics will be. Okay, so now to the main part of the problem. So we all know we have genes, and what do genes do? Anybody want to tell me what genes do? Anybody? Christine, what do genes do?
They make you you.
So what are
they express proteins.
Can you explain that a little bit more? What do genes do with proteins? What do proteins and genes have in common?
What?
What is the relationship between a protein and a gene?
The genes hold the codes that will transcript proteins.
Exactly. All right. So this FMR1 gene is called the Fragile X mental retardation gene, and it regulates the synthesis of the FMR protein, which is the Fragile X mental retardation protein. That's literally the name of the protein. And it is necessary for proper brain growth and development. So all those functions that I talked about earlier, the characteristics that go wrong, if this gene is working right, we can walk normally, we won't have anxiety, we're less likely to have ADD. I mean, all those things can still happen, but they're intensified if this FMR1 gene isn't working properly. The problem with this gene is it's very sensitive, part of the X chromosome, so if something does happen, if there is a mutation to the gene, then that is a big problem because of the sensitivity of this gene. So a normal length of this gene is 5 to 44 repeats of the trinucleotide CGG. So we CGG, CGG, and if it's between 5 and 45, your brain is working perfectly normal. So everybody in here has between 5 to 45 CGG repeats on their X chromosome for their FMR1 gene. Now, there's a concept called anticipation, and this is an increase in the trinucleotide of the CGG and the FMR1 gene. And anticipation is actually when, let's say your grandma has 4 to 55 repeats of the X chromosome. Well, if she passed on to your mom the X chromosome, and it had a mutation, then then your mom might have 45 to 54 repeats. So that means that the next generation, maybe you then would have more than 55 repeats, 55 to 200, which is called a premutation. Now, the point of where you have FXS, which is Fragile X syndrome, is when there's 200 or more repeats, and that's when you have all those characteristics. So this is a graph showing the normal gene, looks like that, and it's down here. This is where the fragile spot is. The premutation, when that occurs, you have between 55 to 200 repeats. Now, I'll talk about what happens with premutation later in the slides, but the full mutation is this, and that's when you have FMRP. So in the premutation stage, Patients nearly always have normal intellect, so you can function normally. Some people might have ADD, but there's nothing really severe like such that you might think they have Down syndrome, or they're not slow to cognitive thinking, they can walk normal, there's no hyperactive behavior. Women, premutations really mainly affect women though, because they can have premature ovarian insufficiency, which means that their period might come really early or come really late. About 15% of women who have a premutation cannot get pregnant after the age of 30, so that's a big problem with that. And then for males, this is a lot more common. It's called Fragile X tremor and ataxia associated syndrome, which is it causes males to have memory loss, the balancing issues, coordination, a lot of things like things that you might see in Alzheimer's patients is very common. And that FXTAS is what happens in premutations of males. And it can happen in females, but it is a lot more common in males. Here's more about affect. It's a more common in women. Problems with balance, hand-eye coordination, amnesia, and problems with your autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system part of your body where like you don't control it. So it's your heart rate, body temperature, organs. It's things that you don't have control over. And so if you have FXTAS, it's really bad because you will. That's why a lot of people have coordination problems because they can't really move, and they'll have ADD or they'll be really hyperactive because their heart rate starts moving up really fast, and they're not ready for it. They don't expect it because it's not something you can control regardless. So this is another term. It's called methylated. It's the occurrence of having an inactive X chromosome in female cells, because we all know females have 2 X chromosomes, and the reason that this is more severe in men is because women can have that methylated X chromosome. So if the mutated X chromosome is methylated in a female, then they'll have more X chromosomes that are healthy, and those are the ones that are being active, and so you don't see the effects of FXS in them because it's not present in their X chromosome. Now, since males only have 1, if they have Fragile X syndrome, then you'll see the mental retardation, you'll see all the signs of it. So that is the end of the lesson part of the PowerPoint. And next, we're going to go into a case study where I am going to have you guys be genetic counselors. I'm going to give you the scenario for a patient, and then you guys are going to have to, based off what you just learned about Fragile X syndrome, are going to have to give a diagnosis. We're going to create a family tree, and then you guys at the end are going to come up with a solution of what patients can do, maybe where they can go in the Seattle area and be recommended for it. So do you guys have any questions about Fragile X syndrome before we go into this case, so you're fully prepared to tell this hypothetical mom, of what she can do for her job?
Well, I'm just assuming it is recessive, right? Like, genetically?
If you have it, it's dominant X-linked recessive. If you have it.
Okay.
So with that methylated part, more likely it's going to be the normal gene that's actually not active.
Okay.
Any other questions? No? So you guys completely understand? You think you can let a parent know about what the problems are going to be? All right. So here's our scenario. Can everybody take out a piece of paper? And as you guys are doing this,
I'm going to use your
a big
paper
part
as
of
my
this
little,
is also genetic counseling.
So it has to be good.
as the display.
A big part of this is also genetic counseling, which is in Fragile X syndrome is actually a syndrome that they have a lot of patients with because it's one of the most common inherited, and they do a lot of patients who have inheritance disorders, and therefore that's why genetic counseling is going to be a part of this lesson for you guys too.
Do you want to?
Everybody have a piece of paper? Ready to go? Alright, so here's a scenario. Write down a family tree as I go along with this. So we have a man named Stephen who's 35 years old, and he has a wife who's 29 years old. Her name is Sarah. Sarah is 20 weeks pregnant with a baby boy. Now, Sarah's been recommended to a genetic counselor, you guys, by